Welcome to Rustler's Reminiscence, stories of hope, faith, and frontier courage. Let the journey unfold. This is a story about how the sheriff inked my name in the gallows ledger in his hand. By dawn, he wants a name, any name. Abilene breathes dust and rumor. Quill scratch, train bell, rope creaking. Golden light slides along the paper fibers. Will I damn a man to save my neck? Abilene runs on hooves, steam, and habit. At sundown, the stock pens heave like a living chest, boards groaning, lanterns popping to life one by one, until the alleys glow the yellow of cheap whiskey. A night train eases in coughing, breaks shoes, squealing, sparks hopping like fleas off the wheels. The freight boys chalk their car numbers in a cramped hand I could pick out blind, and the depot bell counts each coupling as if it were church. I make my living in the seams, a narrow livery behind the hotel where I water trail-broke bays for men too drunk to remember the bucket, errands for storekeepers who don't want their names on certain parcels, notes carried to rooms where the curtains stay shut at noon. I mend boots, too, and I know the print each heel leaves in dust. A cowhand's iron is cheap and round. The railroad issues a plate with a square bite to it. You learn the town by its tracks, their tracks, and by what gets cleaned before daylight. I'd spent the heat counting feed, chalking my own numbers on a board, when the street's noise made a kind of hollow in itself, and in walked Deputy Crow. Booth heels on the boardwalk sound like dice in a tin when a man means business. He didn't speak first, just set a book on my counter like we were settling. Oats. A ledger is a particular weight and a smell tallow ink old rope. He opened it with 2 fingers and turned past pages as neat as the depot's timetable. Names, dates, charges, and quiet arithmetic. I knew the book by rumor if not by touch. The hangman's ledger, kept because the railhead says order is accounting, and the agent likes proof. Crow stood polite, hat in hand, eyes somewhere over my shoulder where the townsfolk pretended not to stare while they pretended not to listen. Out in the pens the cattle lowed as if to answer for us both. Why would the law write any man's name before a trial? Why carry the book to me at all? I leaned in because ink tells on people. The hand was familiar measured, patient, no blot where a hard temper would have dug the nib. Sheriff Adler writes like a man counting ribs on a winter steer. Column rules. Straight as fence wire. I let my finger trail the left margin, soft, like checking a horse's wind. Whatever game this was, I aimed to make him wait on my pace. Crow swallowed like a boy wearing his father's badge. He shifted so the light fell just so, and somewhere on the street the depot bell rang twice, and then again, tolling each little death of daylight. I read down. A brawler from Ellsworth, a knifing behind the assay office, a teamster who put his rig through a storefront and had to pay for pains. The longer I stood there, the quieter everyone got. Men who had business at the post began finding it across the street. Women carried empty baskets the long way around my door. All that polite drift made a current. It pushed me to the bottom of the page, to the fresh line, to the letter that started my name. If a man wants to know why a rope is sized for his throat, he starts where the bodies bought the rope. 3 drovers in 10 days, each found within a stone's pitch of the freight office. One slumped behind a cooper's stack, one folded under the loading dock, one face down in cinders where the switchman eats. No letters carved, no showy cruelty, just a tidy blow high on the ear, and pockets turned, trail pay gone. Boots, belt, and bedroll left. That's a hand that works under the cover of order. The town doctor showed me the same crescent bruise on each scalp, and almost no sign of struggle. By noon, the rumor found its legs. A drifter with a scar had been seen nosing around the freight. I carry a scar clean as a brand along the jaw, a mule's gift from years back. A mark makes a story easy to pass from mouth to mouth, and a story gives a town permission to stop thinking. I walked their evenings backward from the freight bell. Jed from the Brazos rolled his herd across the scales, took coin at the window, and downed 2 tin cups at the stockman's. He told the hostler he meant to sleep in his wagon. He never reached the alley where it stood. Miller, a Colorado boy, with a laughing mouth, had a small run at faro with a freight chit laid on the felt to hold his place. He left cheerful and bled into the gravel 2 doors down from the sheds. Sanchez, careful as a bookkeeper, kept to coffee by the calaboose stove while he waited on a way ticket. They carried him out before sunup. All 3 had business at the same window and walked the same corridor of lamplight between the office and the alley. Each handled a stiff paper square, the clerk tiers to match a ledger line, and the car he assigns. In the sheriff's tray sat 2 torn corners tagged with string. The third I found under straw, where a body had been loaded. I don't put faith in barroom certainty. Patterns live in hands and habits. I set those 3 corners on my bench, trimmed a lamp, and watched the ink. It's a fussy clerk who writes a flat-topped 7 4 with a dragging tail, and whoever chalked the night cars out back wrote the very same way. I had stood by the siding when the train shunted and the couplers clapped. Chalked digits. Slid past on iron while sparks jumped, then turned up again in ink where no drover ought to see them. That numbering sits behind the freight agent's desk, not in a cowhand's pocket. A man inside could follow a pay trail from the window to the darkness, lift a purse, and walk back clean. Power loves numbers. The agent answers to the railroad. The cattlemen demand quiet streets, and the law wants a name it can ink. So the rumor fixed itself to my scar, and the ledger carried my J before any judge heard a word. Crow walked me to the office like we were going to weigh flour, not a life. The boardwalk threw our steps back at us dice in a tin, and his key ring kept time, a nervous little bell he didn't mean to ring. Inside, the jail smelled of coal, smoke, and damp paper. Bars cast black stripes I could feel across my chest. Sheriff Adler waited hatless behind his desk, spectacles folded on the blotter, that tidy hand of his resting on the same ledger Crow had opened in my shop. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the book as if it were a patient animal to be calmed. Crow studied the floorboards and kept his eyes clear of mine. He didn't start with guilt. He started with weather and cattle prices and a telegram from Topeka promising a circuit judge sometime before harvest, meaning not this week. Then he set his facts in a neat row, quiet as fence posts. 3 drovers dead, the cattleman angry, the railroad skittish, the freight agent insisting his yards run clean. "We have to take heat out of this street," he said, and the lantern showed the lines fear had stitched around his mouth. He touched the ledger like a priest touching a Bible. "We do it by the book." The bar's shadows striped his hands when he said it, a brand he couldn't scrub. "There's a judge for that," I said. He smiled without warmth. "There will be, and there won't be before sunup." He drew a breath that rattled like a heat-cracked board. The cattleman bought a hangman off the noon train. He's sleeping at the hotel on the agent's account. The scaffold went up last night for a drunk who sobered just in time. We tested the trap, and it's true. Keys at Crow's belt gave a thin jangle, and the sound ran up the bars and back. "I won't have a mob do my job," Adler said. Voice court quiet. "Name the one who used the darkness, and the sun can rise on order." "Suppose the rot runs under your porch," I said. His jaw twitched like a fresh brand. He opened and shut his spectacles as if they were a trapped bird and set them down careful. "Suppose," he said, "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to look as hard as you can between now and dawn, and spare this town a day of hell. I will not ask how you found the knowing. I will not ask what I can't prove in daylight." He slid the ledger and the quill toward me. The page waited blank under the curl of my jay. Out the window the gallows steps were a fresh drift of sawdust. The wind nosed the rope, and it creaked in the dry breeze. I thought of torn chits and chalked car numbers, a clerk with a smoker's cough, and rail boots that leave a square bite in mud. "Dawn," he said, and the word fell like a sandbag. Then he turned and left me with the book burning in lamplight. Crow followed, eyes down, his keys clacking, once against the jamb. I started where habit hides, in places that don't write receipts. Yet's faro tokens slept in a dented tin at the stockman's. The bartender slid 2 across when I asked which color he'd been playing. The brass felt warm from finger oil, and a tobacco breath the edges kissed with tally chalk. Miller favored whiskey cut with pump water. The girl at the rail kept his marks under a torn matchbook strip 4 short. One long same way the faro man tallied shuffles. Sanchez left. A coffee ring dark as a bruise on the calaboose stove and a biscuit heel in the ash pan, because he didn't like waste. I made a circuit of those small leavings, my pockets whispering with evidence no court would ask to see. A token, a strip of paper, a scrap of bread I left where it lay. Men's nights add up if you let the town do the math doorways, distances. Shadows that fall in the same places at the same hour. All 3 trails tighten to the same corridor between the freight window and the alley where light thins. I rid the ground with my boot brush. Cowhand irons leave a round scuff. The railroad issues a plate with a square bite that prints crisp even in churned mud. There were square bites where the bodies fell, and the spacing said the same short. Stride, office work, not saddle. After dark, the freight office keeps one window lit, a yellow coin behind frosted glass. Tonight the coin trembled. There are 2 clocks in that room, the railroad's oak regulator ticking like a stern schoolmaster you can't talk around, and the clerk at window 2, who tries not to cough and loses. I let the regulator count 30. Strokes while shadows moved across ledger columns laid out straight as rails. He works late when the agent's figures won't settle. Overtime buys some cold pie at his desk and a neat note in the book, after hours, verified, in the same fussy hand that writes the flat-topped 7s and dragging 4s on torn chits. Now and then a waistcoated shape crossed the back room, the agent, by the polish on his boots, fingering the safe and touching each stack of paper like he was counting cattle by feel. The law likes a culprit, it can show a crowd. The railroad likes quiet books. Between the 2, a small man could lift purses in the alley and walk back to his stool clean. I took the long way along the loading dock, lantern low, and put my eyes where boots have conversations. In the soft lip of a puddle lay a square bite, with a nick on the outer corner. I knew that nick. I'd set that very plate last month for a bookish fellow who paid in exact change and apologized to my hammer for making it work. Match cut in my head, heel plate to branding iron, notched to a burned cattle mark. The prince stepped off the dock, crossed 2 planks slick with axle grease, dropped to the yard, and led me past a coil of new hemp the hangman ordered, as if rope were any other tack. Then up the back steps to the freight door where the sill showed lamp black and iron filings rubbed into the grain, the clerk's trick for scrubbing out ink. He'd been erasing something in a hurry, then gone outside to breathe. I could smell cheap bay rum thinning in the night air. Motive is a ledger. A man with debts balances the page any way he can. Protection is a signature. The agent's dotting, approvals where no judge would. Who wears the railroad's boots after hours? The same hand that rules the columns neat enough to bury a purse inside the arithmetic. The laundress works behind the siding in a low room where steam hangs like breath after a hard run. She's a widow by 2 winters, Mrs. Tally to the town, and Nora when a woman with flour on her hands passes a cup through the door. Railcoats crowd her line agents' blue broadcloth, clerks' threadbare black, switchman's canvas, stiff with cinders. The railroad pays her in script and slowness, and the landlord is the same man who signs the freight tallies. I stood in the doorway and let the stove's heat thaw the night from my knuckles. She didn't look surprised to see me, only reached for a clean towel and laid it over a chair, like she could give me a decent place to put my fear. "You keep long hours," she said. The roof leaked a small sound, steady as a regulator clock. From outside, a whistle that didn't belong to the schedule, a short plaintive note like a calf that can't find its dam. I said I was looking for a pattern I could trust. "I've got one," she said, eyes on the tubs. Every Wednesday, the agent's men bring coats late. Every Friday the rent comes due early. She wrung a sleeve until drops beat the floorboards in a neat line. Last night they passed with a man between them. His boots did not touch. One said he'd had good whiskey and bad temper. The other said to let him sleep it off. I've watched. Men sleep. They don't swing by the elbows like that. She turned her head as if to check the room was still ours. Through the thin wall a cough flowered, thin and apologetic, the same little bark I'd heard at window 2. She didn't have to name it. The cough laid a finger on its owner. Bay rum drifted in, sweetness not quite covering the acid metal smell of over-oiled locks. Most nights I hear the late whistle followed by footsteps, 2 pairs paced even, and 1 pair dragging, then the whistle again, as if to bless whatever came of it. She lifted a coat heavy with water and smoke and pinned it to the line, hands fast and sure. Steam blurred the panes. The world outside became a smear you could hide in. "Mrs. Tally," I said, "the law likes tidy answers and the railroad likes quiet doors. If I ask you to say the thing you know, the men who print your rent notices may not forget it." She kept her face on her work. "I already said it," she whispered. To myself, a widow learns which words pay and which words cost. She crossed to a cracked teapot, reached past it to a little blue tin, and from that tin she drew a folded square of stiff paper, a corner torn clean away. One of the men left this on my floor when he shook his coat. Her thumb rubbed the fussy ink at the edge, a flat-topped 7, a 4 with the tail dragging. "I put it away to keep my house in order," she said, meaning something larger than rooms. "I know paper better than I know faces." She stopped to listen. The cough came again, closer now, followed by the hush of a hand that didn't dare knock. A shadow slipped across her lace curtain like a cloud over a pasture. The stove ticked. I felt the town drawing its breath to see whether truth could live indoors. She asked me what would happen if she told. What she'd heard, we walk it in. "Daylight," I said, though even the promise tasted like wire. "On the scaffold if we must." She smiled just a little, the kind of smile a woman uses when she puts a child to bed and pretends the stories keep monsters out. "Men with keys make day out of any hour," she said. "But I am tired of washing their coats and their sins." She stepped close enough that I could see the steam beading along her lashes like dew. In her other hand the laundry water left, her fingers thin and pale. The paper looked heavy as lead there. "He coughs between columns," she said softly. "Counts even when he lies. Bay rum and ink and the sound of coins in a drawer. That's the man I hear. Outside, the whistle gave its small benediction, answered by a boot scuff that stopped just shy of her threshold. Somewhere down the line a switch clacked and reset. Past midnight the sheds breathed like cattle pens, hot straw, cool iron, soot on the tongue. I carried only a pocket knife and the widow's torn chit tucked to my ribs. Yard lamps coined islands of light. A boxcar door yawned, chains ticked. A switch sighed as rails chose a line. I kept to hay stacked 2 men high. Fresh square bites from rail heels dotted dust by the loading planks. They came without talk to and rail boots, coats buttoned wrong, caps low. The first hit me hip high and drove me into the bales. Straw lifted like chaff. The second hung back, measuring. While he did, I got under the first man's wrist and turned. We hit the planks, a grunt, a hiss, breath leaving. My fingers found a pistol butt. I bent a knuckle on it and sent it skidding. The careful one raised his hands like parley, then chopped. At my knee, we went down in elbows and cord. He'd threaded baling wire through a slat to cinch me neat as a ledger. I shouldered his ribs, bone speaking to bone, and came up. The first man flicked his cap at my eyes and broke for the gap. Between cars, I let him go 2 steps, caught leather. He left his belt and his nerve and ran. A muzzle flared white, a strobe against the car's red flank. The shot went wide. Splinters kissed my ear. Straw drifted slow on that one bright breath. The flash fixed him halfway across the yard. I dove behind the bales. The careful one clawed at his pocket and swung something brass. I took it on the forearm, trapped his wrist, and laid the knife handle under his ear. He sagged. The brass clattered and spun, humming, then settled on its face. I kept a boot on his spine and looked. Heavy, clever, warm from a coat pocket. A punch with numbered wheels and a spring lever the kind that bites chits, so ink Mary's car and hour. Lamplight smeared its cheek. Not a cowhand's prize. A freight desk tool. Who signed you that? I pressed his cheek to the plank. He coughed a laugh too close to the clerk's. Nobody signs after midnight. I clicked the lever so the numbers bid air to our hour. Who told you to make drovers sleep? He studied the rafters for a psalm his kind believes. Orders, he said. Orders wear polish. I wired his wrists with what he'd meant for mine and walked him to the yard lamp. His boots printed square bites to the back stair of the freight office. Those steps were different than the public one's varnish rubbed by one set of heels. The knob shone, the brass around it sulked green. I rapped with the punch 3 short, 1 long. The regulator answered, steady as law pretending to sleep. No door opened. Light moved and stilled behind frost. Who gave these men authority to kill? The railroad keeps a list of men who think they do. The sheriff keeps the town breathing by pleasing that list. The brass in my hand said more. On its cheek, under the factory mark where fingers rub, sat 2 crisp letters I've seen on office seals, the initials that clear over time and paid a hangman off the noon train. Not the clerk's. The careful prints led back to the door that guards those letters. I stowed the careful one where straw keeps secrets grain bin, wired tight, a scrap of tow in his teeth, and carried the brass punch like a warrant. The freight office kept its 1 coin of light burning. I rapped 3 short, 1 long with the punch's nose. The regulator ticked. A bolt slid. The back door opened on polish and paper. Agent Merrick wore his vest like armor and his smile like a receipt. Behind him a safe yawned, black mouth propped with a ledger, its belly showing pay envelopes nested in tidy stacks, blue ribbon notes, and a little book ruled to the inch. I set the punch on his blotter. It made a heavy syllable in the quiet. Lamp flame climbed the chimney and found his boots mirror bright. "You lose something," I said. He touched the tool with 2 fingers as if afraid it might bite again. "You find things after hours," he said. "So does the railroad." His eyes went to the punch's cheek, where the factory mark had worn thin, and the initials shone. The same initials topped his letters to Topeka, and cleared over time for clerks who coughed. "Numbers keep this place clean," he said softly. "They keep cattle moving and wild talk from spooking them." "Your numbers match chalk on cars and ink on chits," I said. A second chit for the same car and hour stamped by this walked out in a man's pocket. If he wakes poor, he complains. If he doesn't wake, the book balances. I ponged the torn corners from my vest and laid them by the lamp. Flat-topped 7s and dragging 4s grinning up at us. 3 drovers fed your arithmetic. Your men in rail boots made sure no one checked the sums. He didn't flinch so much as tidy his mouth. "You think like a liveryman," he said, counting oats and forgetting Stampede. 3 bodies. Make a market nervous. 1 culprit calms it. He leaned in the safe's breath-oiled steel. Old money, paper dust came warm. "Say the clerk," he murmured. "He coughs. He's clumsy." The cattlemen rest. The railroad signs off. "You keep your scar out of the sun." Behind me the door whispered again, and Crow's key ring gave its nervous bell. Sheriff Adler filled the threshold, hat in hand, tin star catching the lamp so it burned and went dark in turn, like a signal a man can't ignore. He took in the punch on the blotter, the torn corners, the safe's black yawn. His hand went to the ledger propping the safe and trembled just enough to make the flame dance on his knuckles. Merrick's smile widened the way a brand widens when it takes. "Sheriff," he said, easy as cream, "we're balancing a page." Adler's eyes settled on me like a judge weighing a scale that can't sit level. "You were told dawn," he said without heat, "not midnight." He eased the ledger free of the safe's door, and the hinge side shut, but not before the lamp showed me a blue ribbon note near the top of promissory, with a young hand on it, the same clean patience as the sheriff's, but less certain. The top line carried a family name, inked neat and ashamed. The agent touched the safe with a lover's care and rolled the dial lazy, like a man humming. I looked at the sheriff, not the man, and saw the father fight through. It lives in the soft under the jaw, where you hide a plea. Merrick didn't bother to hide his hook. "Your boy's markers come due," he said quietly enough that a man could pretend not to hear. "The railroad has long pockets and a long memory. Keep order for us, and we'll forget a little debt. Lose the town, and we will remember every dime." Crow stood by the door like a boy scolded by the weather. Adler set the ledger on the blotter where my J curled, waiting like a snare. He steadied the page with his palm, and I saw that palm shake. The star on his vest took the lamp again and threw fire across his cheek. "Name someone by dawn," he said, voice made of quart and dust. "Name the clerk if that's where your boot points." The words had corners he didn't like the feel of. "Your clerk's a patsy with a cough," I said. "He prints numbers he's told to print and clears his throat between lies. Your agent stamps a second life onto paper and takes a first life to hide it. He paid a hangman off the noon train to make tomorrow quiet, and he used your ledger to teach the town where to look." I touched the punch. "That is his hand, not mine." Merrick's smile went thin. "Order," he whispered, "or we get teeth." He meant the rope. I could hear it creak in the dry breeze, even with the window shut. Adler's fingers tightened on the ledger until the paper groaned. A father's hand, not a badge's. I felt the hour narrowing like a chute when cattle crowd and men shout to keep them from breaking their legs. Daylight would make liars or law of us. I'll walk this in daylight, I said. On your scaffold, in front of the agent's men and the bas de neuf, cattlemen and the railroad's nerve. I'll show this punch in the torn corners and the square bites in mud, and we'll see if the town wants a clerk for quiet or justice for clean books. The room held its breath. The regulator ticked hard enough to count my ribs. Adler stared at the lamp until his eyes watered. When he looked back, the star on his chest pulsed with the flame. "You'll start a riot," he said. "You'll buy my boy a rope with a different name on it." The word boy slid out before he could pull it back. The room changed temperature. Abilene gathers before the gallows like church without hymns. Sunrise lifts dust and lays gold along the rope, fibers polished by 100 hands. The hangman tests the trap with his boot and nods like a smith reading heat. At first the town keeps a respectful ring, then bodies press closer. Cattlemen eye the timbers as if pricing a spur. Drummers flatten hats like ledger covers. Boys climb the water barrel for a look at the knot. Far down the line, a train bell gives 2 patient notes. Sheriff Adler stands at the steps, star winking. Agent Merrick waits under the hotel eave, coat folded, boots bright. Crow's keys rest quiet in his fist. Somewhere in the crowd, a small cough blooms and dies. The noose learns my neck. I lift my chin so the knot won't finish me clean if someone hurries. Adler reads order and peace. When he lowers the paper, his eyes won't meet mine. I speak first. Not the confession they came for. I lay out 3 drovers who walked from window to alley and never reached their beds. I hold a torn corner chit. Read the flat-topped 7s and dragging 4s. Point at chalked car doors the same hand as the freight book. I show the square bite a railroad heel leaves in mud, and where that track leads. Back stair varnish, rubbed by 1 set of boots. From my coat I raise a brass punch heavy as a verdict. Sun finds initials on its cheek. I click the lever so numbers bite air to our hour. The cattle hush. The cough answers again, apologetic, practiced. The clerk stands with his hat crushed, flat and his lip bloodless. Bay rum and ink climb the scaffold's air. "Tell it," I say, looking only at him. Before he can choose, Nora Talley steps from the women by the porch and lifts her chin like a flag. Plain words, no lace, late whistles. Coach delivered after midnight. A drover carried between 2 men whose boots printed square bites. A chit corner she found on her floor and hid to keep her house in order. She names the cough. Pebbles into a trough. The circles run out and touch every face. The cattlemen watch Merrick while pretending not to. The hangman glances to the sheriff the way a hired man asks which calf to cut. Merrick's smile shows teeth. "Gallows talk," he says. "The town needs quiet." His right hand dips watch or pistol, practiced. The rope whispers tighter. Crow's keys jingle once and go still. The clerk surges, stalls, the crowd leans. The hangman settles his boot on the lever, because habit rules when a town is watching. I lift the punch. "Numbers don't lie," I say. "They tell who taught them." The bell sounds again, closer. The boards hum like rails. Merrick steps, drawing steel that turns the morning to an edge. A pistol cracks from somewhere not. The scaffold, a splinter leaps by my ear. I don't beg. I don't name a patsy. I hold the punch in torn corners and look at the only man who can trade one quiet for another. Adler lifts his face. Father and badge fight where his jaw meets. His throat. Everything waits, the lever, the pistol, the whistle swelling to drown the crowd. Thanks for riding with us through another tale from the Old West. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. More adventures are waiting on the trail ahead. See you next time.